And we're live. And it's April 4th, and we're in the midst of our COVID lockdown. Good evening, Whiskey Brothers and Whiskey Sisters. This is the Alberta Scotch Society and Friends Whisky Book Club, Week 2. Just as last week, turn that off. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. Did you guys get that?
Yep.
Try not to hurt everyone's ears. Week 2. Just like last week, we're going to start with a quote from a section that we're covering this week. It's a pretty short quote, and it goes like this. When you take a sip of Canadian whiskey, you taste a beverage that is the sum of many influences that have come together slowly, naturally, and deliberately over a period of years or even decades. So I believe this is the result of farmers' hard work and devotion initially, which in turn becomes the distillers' and the blenders' vision. Section 2, which we're now discussing this week, focuses on how these individuals, the blenders and the distillers, their creativity comes together in this wonderful, beautiful spirit right here. So let's take a second, introduce ourselves. We'll do the round table. I'm Dolph. I'm the president of the Alberta Scotch Society, and I'm drinking Glen Breton Battle of the Glen. And let's go with Davin, the guest of honor. Let's go with you first, kind sir.
Hi, I'm Davin de Kergommeaux. I'm the author of this book that we're talking about tonight, Canadian Whiskey, the New Pottable Expert. I'm drinking some Alberta Premium Dark Horse. It's my last bottle. I cracked it for tonight.
Excellent. And let's go to, let's see who's ready. Boom.
I'm Don. I run the Whiskey Dive on Instagram and thewhiskeydive.com. And I am drinking Gibson's Finest Rare 12. Yeah.
I'm Nicole. I'm one of the Whiskey Bells, and I'm drinking Glen Breton Rare 10-year-old tonight.
Good choice.
Hi, I'm Yukon Dave, and tonight I'm drinking North of 7 whiskey from Ottawa.
Hey, that's good stuff.
Well, that's why I brought
it, Dave.
What's that?
Hold that up a second. I don't know if I've ever seen it.
Yeah, I picked it up in Saskatchewan last year.
All right. Thank you, sir.
So it's a single barrel, 45% alcohol. Yeah.
We'll get the rest later.
Okay, and I'm Ryan, and I'm the secretary of the Alberta Scotch Society. And I also am having some Gibson, got a lot of light from my window, but it's the 12-year-old as well.
Excellent. And let's share the view, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. This week is a little bit different with our questions. We have some really pointed questions. We have some controversial questions. But let's start with something that's a little bit light. So let's start with a picture. That's pretty light. How about this? And if you're following along with us, turn to page 31, where you will see the poster entitled From Field to Flask. Everyone see that? My question is, was anyone else wondering why the hell they're dumping the whiskey in that picture? It says dumping whiskey. Who's dumping whiskey? This is a horrible idea.
I just assumed it was because they've got so many barrels, they dump it into one large container.
Well,
What?
It does make sense once I thought about it, but when I saw it the first time, I'm going
dumping it into a field or down the sink.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you.
Okay.
When they're emptying the barrels to make a blend, it's called dumping. So they're dumping the barrel. They dump maybe hundreds of barrels to get the whiskey. That's something. It used to be they would, roll the barrel on its side, and the whiskey would come pouring out of the bunghole. Now they tend to pump it out with a pump, but it's called dumping, and it's not throwing it away. It's dumping it into the next container where it's going to be blended with all the others.
Thanks for the clarification. That's kind of important to me. I've got a 2-question question, so feel free to answer one question or answer both. Canadian distillers prefer microbial enzymes to malted grain enzymes or malted barley enzymes, which surprises me because I thought if you malted barley in your distillery already, why wouldn't you just use that for the starch conversion? Regardless, I wonder if you think that this adds to the flavor profile. So that's question one. And the second part, microbial enzymes results in 3 or 4 day fermentation, which is really short in comparison to Scotch, which could be 7 days and up, depending on what we get. Does this feel like cheating to you? So let's see who wants to answer this guy.
Well, I'll answer.
Done.
Second part of that thing is, I think because they're using so much corn, that corn doesn't really have the enzymes that malt has. So they have to add in that. It's the same for beer. They'll put, that's my opinion on that one. I don't know. Davin, am I close?
Well, you could use malted barley. You could put in a little bit of malted barley to contribute the enzymes to the corn. I think the real reason is that they're consistent and they're not very expensive.
But with the high percentage of corn that's used in some of the large whiskeys, are they getting all the enzymes they want out of the corn, or do they have to add something?
No, they don't get enzymes from the corn at all. They can add a little bit of barley because those enzymes don't go away. They can be used over and over and over and over and over. But mostly they would add, microbial enzymes because they're inexpensive. Malt is the most expensive grain you can buy, I think, right now. So they also contribute some flavor, which they may not want.
Is that cost because of the work that needs to go into sprouting the grains?
It's because you have to grow the grain, harvest it, malt it. Whereas with the enzymes, you can grow them in a few days in a lab.
Alrighty.
Alberta distillers grows their own enzymes, and they just have little fermenters where the enzymes are growing, and then they take them out of that. And I think they do probably 3 or 4 batches a week.
And you said they're the only one left in the industry in Canada that still does that, right? So
yeah, they're the only ones who still grow their own.
All right. So we're on our pointed question number 1. We ready?
Sure.
Yeah.
Davin explains on page 38 how manipulating yeast creates various flavors, but he also says that yeast is not an ingredient. Do you agree that yeast is not an ingredient? And we'll give Davin the last word on this because it's pointed towards him really in the end. So let's see what you have to say.
I think yeast is an ingredient. Without the yeast, we don't have any whiskey.
Without the still, we don't have any whiskey.
Well, the still's a mechanical device, yes. But you can still get alcohol without a still, right?
Yep. And we make beer, and we know that, Dave and I. So we're making beer. And the yeast for us, maybe because we're thinking of it in terms of beer, the yeast.
That's how I think of it.
The yeast contributes tons of flavor. So, and I know the still would contribute tons of flavor in the different ways they create the still or manipulate the still. So I still have a hard time thinking that yeast is not an ingredient. I like it. Anyone else?
So reading, I do like the idea of calling it a producer. I believe it was written in the book.
Yeah.
So because you get rid of it past fermentation, so it's no longer in the process. But I guess since I'm the only one in the group from the States, yeast is a big thing with beer, like you guys were talking about. And it's gotten to the point where multiple distilleries are now noting the yeast strains or part of the yeast strain in their recipe, if you would. So like distilleries like Westland here in Washington, if you go through their bottles on their website, you'll actually see it's like, okay, yeah, we use this portion of this grain, this portion of this grain. this is our yeast strain that we use for it, and then it goes into their fermentation process, bottling process, et cetera, and et cetera. So I agree with Davin that it's not necessarily an ingredient, but it does have some form of contribution into the final product, does it not?
And we'll
It
leave
has
this
a- it
to
has
you,
a
Dave,
food-
Kevin, to finish off.
Okay.
But if you could just mention hops as well in there, and if hops would change your perception. So, anyways, it's up to you. I'm going to make you large. Here you go. You got the floor.
Hops, of course, would be an ingredient because the elements of the hops remain in the beer. And but you put the yeast in, different yeasts will produce different congeners, so you get different flavors. But the yeast itself is all removed. No element of the yeast remains in the whiskey. It produces all kinds of chemicals when it eats the starch, but it does not. The yeast itself does not remain. No part of the yeast remains in the whiskey, so it is not an ingredient of the whiskey. A person who was allergic to yeast would not be allergic to whiskey.
No, that's a good answer for that
It's
one right there.
It processes the starch. It turns it into all kinds of flavorful chemicals, but then it is taken out and it's gone.
There we go.
Yeah, you don't ingest any of the any of the yeast, but it does play a
Well,
very important role.
let me back this up. In beer, you have spent yeast in unfiltered beer.
We're not talking about beer. We're talking about whiskey that has.
That's all I know.
And after the distillation, it's all gone. All right, we're good. Next question. I like the pointed ones a little bit. So we have 3 pointed questions and 3 other. Well, you'll see. I'll get to it. So we're going light right now. What is your favorite one-line quote? And I'm going to go first. Mine's on page 60, and it's 3-year-old rye grain. Whiskey races around your palate like a puppy with a toy. That's my favorite quote. Who else got a quote for me?
So mine was actually on page 61. If distilling whiskey is a science, blending it is an art, and almost alchemical art at that.
Yeah, I like that one. I'll take that too.
And we're going to see that again at the end. Dave, you got one?
No, I stole Don's, or I'm using Don.
Done. Nick?
I like the puppy analogy. It was so descriptive. It stuck out for me.
Very cute. And Ryan, you got one for us?
You know what? No, I didn't get a quote from this section.
Okay. Sorry. No, I don't want to put you on the spot. And Davin, you wrote the whole thing, so I don't know if you have a favorite line from it. So we could just pass on that if you want to.
You know what I put a lot of thought into?
Yeah?
With the last paragraph of each chapter, which was supposed to be an introduction to the next chapter.
So your segue. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree. That was good. And my quote at the beginning was from the end of the chapter as well as you're going on. So, ready for the next one? Controversial question number 1. So we had pointed questions, which is kind of questioning Davin a little bit, and controversial ones where it's not questioning him, but maybe the whiskey industry. And this one kind of goes against the whiskey industry as a whole in the fight that's going on now. And so on page 41, it's the quote is, "Fortunately, distillation is not an entirely efficient process. So traces of these congeners distill along with the ethanol, and they provide the basis for some of the flavors found in Canadian whiskey." So if we accept this, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this statement, I think most people would say it's true. If we accept this, do we not have to accept the notion of terroir, that it has a place in whiskey discussions and in tasting notes? So let's see what people have to say.
I'll go first if you want.
Yes, please.
So I do feel like terroir is becoming a prominent feature in whiskey and their stories. So, I mean, we don't have, the restrictions like champagne for wines or cognac for brandies. It's we have, you can't call it Scotch unless it's coming from Scotland, which is kind of a terroir in its own. It became famous with the peat. Ireland didn't use it that much. That was part of their separation. But today you have like Japanese whiskey in their Mizunoa oak, and Washington, like Westland, using their Garyana oak, which is native to Washington State. And that was, part of the reason why Remy Martin became interested in them, is because that company as a whole is very interested in the terroir of spirits. So once upon a time, no, I don't think it would have been a prominent thing. But as time is going on, it's becoming a little bit, more of a forefront type concept, since it's a way to differentiate, my whiskey from your whiskey, or anything else like that. So, I think it is becoming a little bit more prominent, not so much in the process, but in the finishing.
All right, good answer.
Actually, I've got a twist to that. Do you think this is just a way to make whiskey a little bit more snobby, with the idea of adding terroir to it to elevate it, the same that they've done with wines and other spirits, rather than making it as a beverage that we can all drink?
Well, does it not come down to that best story wins thing that we talked about?
Yep, last week. Davin, let's go to you for the end of this.
Well, there are a few things here. First of all, there's terroir and there's terroir. If you're using grain from the same fields, and you're using the same yeast, and then it can have the flavors of the land. It can be specific, and it's not just house style. You can actually represent what you're doing. I mean, a guy like Mark Renier has really, really worked hard on terroir. He did that with Bruichladdich when he reopened Bruichladdich. Now he's got Waterford, and he's doing the same thing. And you can really taste the geography in his spirit at Bruichladdich. And he tells me that you can taste it at Waterford as well, and I believe that. But I think that, Nicole, you've really hit the nail on the head. There are a lot of people in whiskey, people who are trying to sell whiskey and find new ways to make whiskey interesting, who are tracking wine. They're 20, 25 years behind wine, but they are. And the thing is, like, a perfect example is, if you take a nice bloody steak, rare steak,
yep,
and you eat that and you have a nice tannic red wine, it is sensational. It's just a wonderful combination.
Yep.
If you take a nice, spicy, maybe Thai food or something like that, and you drink a Gewürztraminer with that, again, you get that complementarity. And people are trying to force us into matching food with whiskey. It doesn't work. But it's wine, and they're saying, okay, well, they're using, they can get people to come out at dinner time. We can sell wine to them at dinner time, because when we're demonstrating our wines, because we're there to eat and we can have all these wonderful pairings. And people are artificially trying to make whiskey and food pairings. It doesn't work. The reason wine works so well, or beer works so well with food, is you can drink it and use it to quench your thirst. You're not quenching your thirst with whiskey unless you dilute it down to about 20%. So I think you're right. People have said, okay, this really works in wine, and wine sells like crazy. Let's see if I can ram my whiskey into that somehow. And of course, people come along, and we can make them believe that. Oh, what an exquisite match. Chocolate and whiskey. Chocolate kills your palate. It might taste good together, but you can no longer taste that whiskey, and you can no longer tell anybody what that whiskey tastes like. Good experience, but so I agree with you, Nicole. That's very perceptive. We're trying to turn whiskey into wine. I started a story a while back for Whiskey Magazine called "The Vinification of Whiskey," but in any case, I didn't finish for.
You didn't finish
for political reasons.
Oh. Pointed question number 2. We ready? All right. Davin wrote, Let's dispel the GNS myth right now. Canadian whiskey is never made with grain-neutral spirits. Tiny amounts of young rye or base whiskey may occasionally be skillfully or used skillfully as top dressing to brighten or enhance certain flavors. But neutral spirits, never. So, has anyone ever read very much, or has anyone read very much about GNS, grain neutral spirits? And is it a big thing in the US? So I'm going to start with Dawn. I'll put you on the spot there, buddy.
Yeah.
So
I said it.
you know, a lot of the American whiskey laws I've read into, it's very restrictive on what you can and can't use. I would assume you can use grain neutral spirits in some things, but it wouldn't be, you know, an American bourbon. It wouldn't be an American rye. It would fall under the American whiskey category, where you can kind of do, you know, some of the fun things that you can't do with bourbon and rye, because, you know, with us, it's, you know, has to be 51% corn, has to be 51% rye for their categories. But it's not really a forefront type, you know, conversation, if you would. You'll see it in some of the shines or the white dogs, but not much in the aged spirits, at least not that I've found.
All right. I'm back. Good answer. Anyone else with GNS? Grain neutral spirits?
Yeah, I got a comment if you want to.
Yeah.
I have to, usually I like this stuff because I have to go and do some research on my own. And technically grain neutral spirits are 95% alcohol. But in the book, Davin, you noted somewhere that our large distillers usually distill their lighter whiskey to 94% ABV, and then they blend back later at some time down the road.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking the two things are kind of close, aren't they?
Yeah, well, you know, the congeners that we can taste, our palates can taste, can be present in parts per million. So that means if it was 99.9% alcohol, you could still detect congeners in that. But we can also taste parts per billion, and we can taste some of these things in parts per trillion. So when there's 5 or 6% of something other than alcohol, there's like huge room for congeners that you can taste. However, I think that's kind of a different story here. First of all, bourbon and rye, I mean, we all talk about this now, but these are spirits that have only been around for a very short time. Oh, they've been made for ages, but nobody was drinking them. American whiskey was blended whiskey. A whiskey like an American blended whiskey is allowed to include, and almost all of it does, 80% grain neutral spirits. Oh, did I say grain neutral spirits? It can contain 80% neutral spirits. It doesn't even have to be grain. It can be cane neutral spirits. It can be root neutral spirits. It can be fruit neutral spirits. Yeah. Okay, so, and these are the whiskeys that were the really big sellers 20 years ago. So, it was very common to drink a whiskey that was 20% bourbon or rye. Bourbon and rye are they're just a couple of categories of 35 or more different categories of American whiskey. Yep. If you look at American light whiskey, it can be 95% neutral spirits.
Wow.
So neutral spirits. Wow. And this is what is confusing to a lot of people who come from America, and when they think of blended whiskey, they think of these whiskeys like Seagram 7, which is 80% neutral spirits, and then they see Canadian whiskey and they just make the same assumption. So really, you know, when you say there's no neutral spirits in Canadian whiskey, the idea here is this is not the American definition of blended whiskey. This is 100% whiskey. All of the components in this are fully matured whiskey. So that's what I was trying to get at there.
Well, I think there's something else going on with neutral grain spirits. Is it's almost seen as a cheap way of buying alcohol. So if you're running a distillery, you can use a whole bunch of that to lower your cost.
Yeah, if you want to make gin, first of all, I hate the term neutral grain spirits. This is new. It was just introduced with the craft distillers. I swear to God, somebody had a conference and the guy, they was talking about grain neutral spirits. He got it wrong and everybody went home and started saying neutral grain spirits. And that seems ubiquitous now in the craft distilling movement. So grain neutral spirits, that's opposed to cane neutral, things like that. Okay, so, yeah, you can buy spirits that have been distilled in a column still, inexpensive, and use them to make gin or vodka, or well, you could use them to make whiskey for that matter. But the thing is, people who are trying to differentiate their product and say this is so much better because we made it all on site, that appeals to a certain demographic, people who want stuff that's made locally. But the stuff that is, less expensive and still tastes pretty good, that appeals to a different demographic. So it's not that one is better than the other. It's just that the little guys who have high overhead and small production and are making it all themselves, I don't blame them for differentiating themselves and say, you know what, when you buy this, 100% of this is made right here in this town.
Excellent. Well, we pick these type of questions, the pointed questions, because it seems when Davin's writing the book, he seemed very passionate about it. So I pick on those items. Those are the points that I'm trying to get. And it worked out very well, I must say. Thank you very much. Good stuff. You know what? Let's take this moment. And Davin, we're going to start with you. We're going to see what's in your glass, if you can tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I'm drinking Dark Horse from Alberta Premium. This is a whiskey that is made in Alberta. Christ, how do I do this? Crumbs, how do I do this? Okay.
It's all good. You're good.
Okay. It's made from 100% pot distilled rye. Pardon me, there's some column distilled rye in here as well. And then it has about 7% of sherry added to it and about 1% of old granddad bourbon added to it. To give it a little bit, a bit more complexity to the spirit. So it's a whiskey that I really, really like. And I have to say, this is my last bottle. I don't think they're making it annianymore.
They aren't. And because we actually had this on Friday. Yeah. Last night, we had our tasting, and this is our bottle that we had. Well, this is one of my full bottles of it. My lovely wife's giving me the other one. We had a tasting with the Alberta Scotch Society last night, and this was one of our 3 bottles that people never saw. It was a blind tasting, and this was the 3rd, and it didn't go over fantastic. My what? Look at her. Stop it. Sorry. Stop it. It went over fairly well, but I don't know if you have the same or thoughts, Davin. The finish on that is a little bit off for me. There's something in the finish that I don't know if it's sour or it just takes a dry kind of road right out. I like the nose. I like the palate. The finish was long, but there was something about it that was a little bit different for me. Do you get anything like that?
There's a sourness there. It's like dill pickles, and that's the sourness you get in American rye. And I think that's kind of the market they were aiming at. But in any case, it's now being sold in the States as American rye. So,
and they stopped production, I believe it was 6 months ago. And so I've been telling friends, anyone, if you ever see the Dark Horse, to pick them up because you're not going to be able to get them anymore.
Yeah.
All right, Ryan, you're up. What's in the glass?
Well, I've been drinking my Gibson 12, and I had 3 choices. Of course, I was looking at the 8-year-old, the 12-year-old, and the 18-year-old. And when I looked at the 8-year-old, it was very dark compared to the 12 and the 18. And so the first thing that came to my mind, of course, is they add a lot of coloring to that one to be so dark. I went for the 12-year-old because I started with just a small bottle, which would have been 200 milliliters for $23, and I could buy the 750 mils for $38, so a bit better bang for my buck. And I've been drinking
Oh.
mine actually with a lot of water. I found though for only being a 40% whiskey, I got a lot of the kind of the vapors of the alcohol coming off the nose right away. And so I diluted it with, not just a couple of drops of water, but quite like a pour of water, which brings out a lot more of the flavors. And that was surprising to me because 40% is a fairly low alcohol percentage, considering I've had some cask strengths where I didn't want to add water at all. I find it's the finish that I really enjoy off of this one with adding the water, because it's got more of a fruity note to it, which has been kind of nice, because then I can, have a drink and then the flavors linger without me having to constantly be drinking my whiskey.
To drink more and more and more to keep getting that flavor. I understand. All right, we're up with Nick.
Well, I cracked a bottle of Glenbretton Rare 10-year-old single malt. It was finished in American oak. This is actually my first Glenbretton. I've never had any before.
Ooh, really?
I was surprised at how orange the nose is. Like, there's a ton of orange right off the nose. Baking spices, and then on the mouth, it's a lot of those dried fruits with a really long dry finish, a lot of leather. So quite interesting.
All right, sounds good. And I do quite enjoy it, and I have for a while. So I'm glad you picked it up. Now we're going to go to Dave. What you got for us, Dave?
Well, here's my North of 7, and I thought it was a Saskatchewan whiskey, but I didn't notice it until tonight that it's actually made in Ottawa. So I was going to say I did it for Davin, but it just happened to be that way. I was over there I drove across the border, picked it up, and thought it was kind of cool. It's a single barrel. It's 45% alcohol, and it's a corn, wheat, rye, and barley mash. So it was barrel number 2, 238, 238 bottles in the offering. So I like the nose on this. It's got kind of a candy, kind of an oily. I don't pick up any alcohol really on it, which really surprised me.
Yep.
Yeah, and I still get that little bit. It's an unusual taste. It does taste like some kind of a candy that I've had, but I don't know what it is. Davin, have you tried this?
Yeah, I really like that whiskey. I don't get the candy taste, but it could be a different barrel that I tried. Those guys, they started out trying to make bourbon style whiskeys, and so they're using mash bills. And I really like what they're doing there. Everything they produce is fantastic. I really like it. They also make leatherback rum, which is a really cool rum that they're making here in Canada. And I did a tasting head-to-head with Barbadian rum a while back at the Rideau Club. And it was really quite interesting how exotic our Canadian rum tasted. Yeah.
So how long have they been distilling?
Well, here's the book that I just wrote, and I'll go to their page and see what it says.
My book's in the mail.
That's fantastic.
With my check, is it?
Yeah.
Let's see. They were founded in 2013 by Greg Lippin and Jody Mile.
Okay, so good time then.
Yeah, good time, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll have you put up that book again. This is your second book.
Yeah, this is
and hold it just right beside your face. It's just right beside.
Oh, there.
There we go.
That's my new book.
And it came out when, Davin?
Pardon me?
When did it come out, Davin?
It came out on Tuesday of this week.
Woo-hoo.
The Definitive Guide to Canadian Distilleries. Look, it's all color. It's got maps in there. It's beautiful.
Lots of pictures for me.
Lots of pictures where the guys can't really see recipes and all kinds of things like that. But it's got maps where all the distilleries are. You can, every distillery in Canada is in there on one of those maps, so you can drive there.
No, I don't know if you're breaking up or not. Sorry. Let's go to the whiskey dive.
So I am also
All right.
drinking.
What you got for us, Don?
I am also drinking Gibson's Finest 12-year-old. Believe it or not, I did not know it existed whatsoever until I went to the Banff Whiskey Experience, and they were making whiskey sours with it. It was by far one of the best whiskey sours I've ever had. So when I got back down to Washington, I had to find a bottle. Did not have any intentions on drinking it neat, to be honest, until I saw that was in the page for this section. So I poured it, and I was drinking a little bit earlier, and everything that Davin noted was, the typical Canadian profile. It really kind of shines through on this. The butterscotch up front, the caramel, the bit of rye heat. Like, it's not even aggressive. It's just a tinge of rye spice. It's very well balanced for how little I paid for the bottle. I really like it. I don't think I would pass up replacing this bottle once it's empty. I might try and find something else. They're 18-year-old, but it's a really good, well balanced pour.
And how much did you pay for it down south there, Don?
I want to say it was around $30. Might have been a little bit cheaper.
I think we're the same thing.
It was $38 here in Edmonton, Canadian.
Alrighty. And it looks like, sorry, it's all wonky. It's my turn. So mine is the Battle of the Glen. And I'm going to hold it here without my wife trying to do it for me. So mine will not be a tasting note tonight, but rather a fantastic story of our own Canadian version of David and Goliath, in case you haven't heard the story of Battle of the Glen. So this is Lenora Distillers, Glen Breton, and the word Glen is important here. Glen Breton Battle of the Glen, repeated twice. Essentially, the story goes like this. The SWA, Scotch Whisky Association, a Goliath of an organization who guards the interests of Scotch whisky manufacturers, claimed in Canadian court that our brethren could not use the word Glen in the title of their whiskey. They were saying Glen belonged to Scotch whiskey only. So they brought it to court and they lost. But the SWA then appealed it to the Federal Court of Canada and they won. So it's going back and forth. We're not done yet. So Glen Breton's flagship 10-year-old, which Nick had, so that's their flagship, they had to put that on hold, but it was sitting in barrels and it was aging, maturing the whole time. So they weren't selling it, but they were still doing well. They're doing well by the whiskey. So next, Glenore Distillers, our David, didn't accept this, and they go to Federal Court of Appeal, and they win. So it's gone back and forth, but we're not done, because the very last place that they can go, the SWA, Scotch Whisky Association, the Goliath, they don't give up. They go to the Supreme Court of Canada to get their final decision then. And what was a little bit pissy on their part is they applied for this in the very last day that they were allowed to. So they were letting these poor guys stew and worry over a long period of time before they finally said, no, let's keep this going in court. So they go to the Supreme Court of Canada, and on June 11th, 2009, the final word of judgment was proclaimed, and David obviously wins. And what's good about this is the Scotch Whisky Association had to pay all the legal and court fees from the very beginning, and they had this excellent stash of mature whiskey. And I feel very patriotic drinking this 15-year-old, very commemorative blend. So here, I'm going to show this to you again. That's the one. I won't do tasting notes because I've talked too much already. And here's the box, because if you see it, you'll see it in this box right there. You get a good view? Okay. Are you ready? Let's share the screen All right. And now we are off to our next question. And if I could get that, controversial question number 2. And I think if you see the Glen Breton Battle of the Glen for less than $125, buy it. A lot of people have raised the price, but if you're around 125 and less, you should do it. Controversial question number 2. All right. I'm going to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down from people as I ask the next question, if that's all right. And then we'll continue from there. So Davin mentions the exacting work needed for consistency in whiskey brand. Let's get a thumbs up. Who wants consistency in their whiskey? Thumbs up or down? We're sideways. I'm doing this and that and that. Okay. So back and forth. Those of you with your thumbs up or kind of like this, which brand in particular did you like that you want consistency with? And for me, it's Oban 14. That's the only one I really do because that's the one I go back to. And that was the first bottle I ever bought and the one I've drunk the most. Anyone else? Yep.
If I had to pick one bottle, it'd probably be Old Pulteney 12.
Ryan?
For me, it's every single one because there's an emotional attachment to every single one of my bottles. So if I'm talking to a friend about a Glenfarclas 17 or an Oban 16, I have in my mind an experience that I've had with it, and I want that bottle to be frozen in time and have the same flavor every time I buy it.
Alrighty. And Davin? Oh, sorry. Go ahead with.
I was gonna say that was part of what I wrote down was that things like this that we're doing right now. Ryan and I have the exact same pour in our glass.
Yeah.
Though we're drinking it differently, he's added water, mine's neat. I can talk with him later on, and we can share the same tasting notes, on this glass, and we're in 2 different countries.
Yeah.
But at the same time, with the craft distillery area, you kind of like the experience of what you can do that a big distillery won't take the risk to try. And I'll yield the rest of my time for that.
No, I agree. That's a good answer. Davin, what you got for me?
Well, I think that once again, Don has kind of hit the nail on the head, as Nicole did earlier. The thing with consistency for a small distillery, and 2 brewers is a perfect example. It doesn't have to be consistent from one bottle to the next because it's batch based. Each one is a different batch, and you want something different. But that represents the most microscopic part of the market. Though for the majority of people, most of the people going to the store want their whiskey to taste the very same as it did the last time. If I buy a bottle of Crown Royal and I want to know what it tastes like. And it was Sam Bronfman was the guy who said this. When someone goes to the store and buys a can of Coke or a bottle of Coke, they want it to taste the very same as the one they had last time. And our products are going to be the same. So he put his staff to work figuring out how they could make it the same every time. That's why if you buy a bottle of Crown Royal, there are 50 different components in that because they can adjust them. Because each year, of course, the whiskey tastes different because the grain is different. They can adjust them so it's always the same. Now, here's the reason you want that. Now, if you walk into a liquor store in Texas, you might see, I don't know, like 5 or 6 pallets of Crown Royal sitting in there. That's the delivery they just got. There'll be more the next day and more the next day. And that's one transaction delivering all those pallets of whiskey. If somebody gets a bottle and they don't like it and they bring it back to the store and the store has to give them their money back and then they have to go to the distributor and the distributor has to get their money back and the distributor goes to the manufacturer and gets their money back, that's one transaction as well. It costs just as much to return one bottle as it does to deliver 7 pallets. It's transaction cost. They don't want people returning bottles of whiskey, so they give them something that they expect to get. When you're dealing with a small distillery such as Westland or such as 2 Brewers or such as North of 7, you're expecting something a little bit nuanced each time. You're expecting something a little bit different. So when and that's why I said I've tasted that whiskey, Dave, but I don't get that note on the end, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. It's just that mine was from a different cask. So I think it depends, but consistency, for a large producer, for a producer that has got a regular customer base, they really have to work very hard to make sure it's identical every single time, because they're going to get returns, and that's expensive when they get returns.
Nick, do you have something?
Well,
you were halfway. You were like that, right? So
I'm halfway, but listening to Davin's comments, I've got a question to that. Is if we're looking at these big producers and they're trying to do consistency from a product sales, then why is there always this issue about coloring being added and chill filtered versus non-chill filtered?
First of all, coloring, this is a complete, total nonsense. You cannot taste that coloring. Here is a bottle of E150. Okay. And I got this from Diageo. I've done the tests with a bunch of us malt maniacs. We've done the tests where we tasted the same whiskey with and without the coloring. You cannot taste this. This is a very bitter substance. This spirit caramel. It's not sweet. It's very bitter, and you know that bartenders add a bit of bitters to make a drink just brighten up the whole drink, just like you add salt to meat. But the reason you want to add color is so that it's always the same color. Because if people take it home and it's lighter than the one they have, they're going to bring it back. You look at Gordon and MacPhail whiskeys. It doesn't matter what distillery. Everyone is exactly the same color because they color it so that they can get that. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's changed in the last few years. I don't know. But so they color it. Yeah. So it will be consistent. It does not influence the flavor whatsoever. Chill filtering doesn't affect the flavor. It does affect the texture, though. It really does. And I've been at Gordon and MacPhail where they're filtering their whiskeys. Pulled the filter pad out, and you can see if you rub your finger on it, it's like white butter, grease on the pad. And it doesn't taste it like you taste it. It doesn't have a flavor, but it certainly has a nice greasy feel, which feels good in your mouth. So I agree. Chill filtering does change the feel of the whiskey. But the reason they do it is because if the whiskey gets cold and you get these flocks of fatty acids coming out, people think there's something wrong with the whiskey. They bring it back to the store, and there's another whole transaction, taking that whiskey back, refunding the money, getting it to the distributor, getting it back to the manufacturer. So they take it out because it's just too risky to leave those fatty acids in. But for whiskeys that are going to connoisseurs who understand this, you don't have to chill filter it because if they see the flocks, they understand what this is, and they bottle it at 46% because these people don't mind paying a little bit more for their whiskey anyway, so you can bottle it a little bit higher ABV. So, but for whiskeys that are going to be bought by the general public, you don't want to give them any excuse to bring it back.
And I'm going to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you think some of those whiskey enthusiasts who like those one-offs that aren't chill filtered, that are a little different, that have the flocks in there, they're creating some of the issues then for that average consumer and creating that problem where the average consumer goes, oh, I can't drink Crown Royal because my whiskey loving friend turns his nose up at it, even though it is a consistent product, and I, as that drinker, enjoy it.
I hope that people don't let other people tell them what whiskey they should drink.
Good.
Tell
them to go to hell. You go to hell. Leave you alone. All right, guys. I want to add to that, though. Because when we listened, I don't know how many of you saw this on Weiser's Wednesday, but Davin was talking to Dr. Don about this specific issue. And for him, and we found out for Davin that his go-to whiskey when he was younger was Glenlivet 12th, and he talked about it a couple times. But in the conversation, the point was made that we need something to recalibrate our palate so that you have a baseline to compare your whiskeys to. So, and it came with this thought of people not telling you what to what to drink or what's good or what's not. Because Don was saying, how do you get around this concept where people follow people online, influencers, and these individuals will say, I love this, go get it. I hate it, don't get it. He said, how do you get around that? And Davin's answer was really to have your baseline. And I think that worked fantastic. And I think for me, I was a thumb sideways because I like having this baseline. For me, it's Oban 14. The other thing that creates the baseline for us, and Nick and I both do this when we go to tastings, we sit side by side often, and we have a little pot of coffee. So the little coffee grinds, we knock a little hole in it. And after you've had like 3 or 4 different whiskeys, you have to take a sniff of this just to kind of recalibrate things, bring it back to what you think is normal before you taste something else. But generally, I like independent bottlers for the opposite reason. And I like Two Brewers for the opposite and Westland for the opposite, because you will get a taste with the distillery, because there's a very specific taste to Westland as well as Two Brewers. But when you get to the different batches or the independent bottlers, you'll taste the same whiskey or portions of it, but you'll get something very, very unique as well, which is what I love. But ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of this. And before we go to our next, I forgot the name, the After Jam. Before we get to the After Jam, I had a whole bunch of questions to ask, but this is my last one for this show. And then we'll go to the After Jam. In a couple of words, what did you learn about this section? And no other explanations. We just want a couple words, half a sentence, what you learned from this. And we'll talk about it further during the After Jam, along with the other things, because I had some pointed questions for Davin, because he does the book, he waxes poetic about the it's pointed question number 3. It's forget it. I'll say it then. You have to come to the After Jam. Here's my one sentence. Distillers diluting their beer to force a longer distillation. That surprised me, and I don't know if it should have, but that did. So anyone else got a sentence? Something they learned?
I was surprised that the big distillers do some whiskey at a high ABV, and then they do what they call a flavoring whiskey. I never knew that before.
For me,
my question there was, why don't they just make all flavoring whiskey?
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah.
For me, it was the influence of the whiskey, of the yeast. The yeast really does play a major role in contributing to the flavor of the whiskey.
Don? Yep.
No.
Yep.
I've got one.
Yeah, Nick?
The same approach is used by Japanese distillers when they make sake.
Okay, good. That'll be a good conversation for the next one as well. And Davin, I know you wrote the book. I keep saying it. Is there a sentence in here you can think of that surprised you when you learned initially?
Well, I started out at square zero, so.
No, you were a whiskey writer, Davin.
Yeah. No, I don't know what the surprise is. No, I enjoyed writing the book, and it took a long time, but I mean, I learned a lot every day when I was doing this. You know. Oh yeah, Hiram Walker used to make single malt whiskey.
Okay. Good. And I would love to taste that. If I could actually get my hands on that, I would love that. But
Me too.
I don't know if I have to. Yeah. Okay.
Let's tell people,
let's
tell people what book we're talking about. It's this one.
Oh, we'll do that. I'll focus on 7. So I'm going to invite everybody to this After Jam. After Davin says his last couple words, we're going to take about 5 minutes for me to save this video and then go to the next video and invite everyone back in. So we'll see you all back in about 5 minutes. and you'll see some of those other pointed questions that I didn't get to that we'll ask Davin. And we'll have fun, and we'll open up some other drams. And I've got this one right here, which is a peated Glen Breton, which I don't know too many of you have seen, but this is fantastic. I had this at the tasting, so I'll open that one there. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming back tonight. Thank you for everybody for being part of my life when we're sitting at home and a little bit bored. This is the book we're talking about this week. This is the book we're talking about for 4 more weeks after it. So thank you all for coming. And Davin, we're gonna close off on you, buddy.
Okay, what am I supposed to say?
Thank
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thanks for reading my book. I'll hold that up on Canadian Whiskey, the New Portable Expert. And
beautiful.
I guess we'll be back next week, and we'll go on to the 3rd section.
Oh, and you know what? I didn't say this quite loud enough, I think, before. Dr. Don Livermore is going to be with us here next week, and which is really exciting for me because we've got Davin, we've got Dr. Don. These are like our Canadian royalty in whiskey, and they're both going to be on the same show at the same time. This is really exciting. So I'm loving what's going on. So and next week, the title for the 3rd section is, and Don liked this one the most, which is why he wanted to pick the 3rd week, The Pleasures of Canadian Whiskey. So he's going to talk about that. So thank you very much, everybody. Signing off. Hopefully we see you back next week. And please do come to the After Dram. We let loose a little bit more. And like I said, I got some more questions for Davin I didn't get to this time. Thanks so much. Stay healthy and stay happy. Ciao, guys.
See you later.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And